It's the most wonderful time of the year. It's snowing outside here in New York City, but more importantly, it's Tiers Week. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Monday, January 17th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. How we doing, Chris? So you got a new tattoo this weekend.
I did get a new tattoo. That is number 4 in the last 14 months. It's quite addicting when you get one. This one is from the Star Wars Rebels show. It's the Fulcrum logo for Ahsoka Tano because she's my favorite Star Wars character. And, I just got to make sure that I leave it alone this time because I didn't let it heal last time, and I had to get that touched up this weekend. So just, that's a tip. If you get a tattoo, it is an open wound. Don't touch it.
Chris, there is a non-zero chance that I get a tattoo next weekend because I'm going away on my bachelor party to New Orleans. And I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not really responsible for what happens. I guess that's up to the people that I'm with. But there's a chance. There's a chance that it happens. I used to be allergic to ink when I was a kid, so it seems like not a great idea. Maybe I need to get like a test or something first. I don't know.
How are you doing? Might not work out for you.
It might not.
Yes. Do you want to make that many lifelong commitments that close together, Frank?
Yeah, I mean, why not, Scott? You only live once. How you doing? Lots of people looking forward to the position tiers as they do every single year. And today we're going to focus on the corner infield. We've got first and third base. Kind of look like opposite ends of the spectrum so far this year in terms of just breaking down the positions. But what do you think, Scotty?
Oh, third base is a disaster. I don't even know that you could put anything on the same spectrum as it, opposite end or otherwise. These are both both of these positions really are kind of their own thing. First base is top light, I guess, especially compared to like shortstop and second base. But yeah, first base is loaded with players who can fill out your corner infield spot late in a draft, or if you play in a deep league, like there's plenty of first basemen to go around if competence is all you're looking for. If you're looking for studliness, not so much.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely fair. Third base, we've talked about it plenty. I'm sure other people have realized at this point as well that third base is pretty shallow. There's not a lot of studly talent up at the top. I think you can say the same thing for first base, but first base is actually pretty deep. Chris, when we're talking about tiers overall, how to use them in a snake draft versus a salary cap draft, what would you say to that?
It's just mostly it's all about knowing where the most value remains or the most viable players in the part of the draft that you're at. So if if you're picking 6th and it's the 7th round and you've got 3 really good third basemen left and only 1 good second baseman left on your list, you take the second baseman now because the third baseman, it's not guaranteed that they'll be there, but they have a better chance of being there. So it's mostly just about trying to optimize the way that you approach the draft at each point in the draft. That is basically the biggest way to do it.
Scott, I think when discussing tiers, I often think of them about them as players who are projected for similar overall value, not necessarily that they're going to do the same things, but just overall output maybe by the end of the season. And I think specifically for salary cap / auction drafts, you might want to jump in on a position tier earlier rather than later, because as that tier starts to dwindle down, you're going to see the last player in that tier is more than likely going to go for the rest of the players in that tier because people realize, they know, like, okay, the talent is drying up.
Simple supply and demand. What you often see is the first player in a tier will sometimes go for way less than he should, and then people will be like, oh no, now we have to end. And so that'll happen. But sometimes that first player goes for way too much. And so it's always a balancing act. But I think you actually asked Scott about that.
Maybe that's why people confuse, sometimes people confuse the things we're saying. No, it's okay. You kind of have to approach it reverse. You kind of have to use the tiers almost the opposite way in a salary cap league where you're auctioning off players. Just wanted to get that in there in case people didn't know what a salary cap league was. you almost have to do a reverse approach tiers reversed in that than in a snake draft, where snake draft, you're trying to aim to get the last player in a tier, second to last, when it's close to completion. And then a salary cap draft, you might want to jump in on the bidding in one of the earlier players in a tier. But, it's tempting not to, right? If you got a tier of 6 players and it's, the bidding, you feel like it's getting kind of high on that first guy. You're like, oh, well, there's 5 others I can turn to. But then the same thing happens with the second guy and the third guy and the fourth guy. And pretty soon it's like, oh, geez, that last guy ends up going for $10 more than you were expecting him to go for, because everybody knows. Everybody knows. So, yeah, they're harder to use in that format. Everything's harder in that format, right?
Yeah, because every draft's going to be different, and obviously that's true of all snake drafts. But what you'll often see too is the last guy in a tier will just last for the next 50 nominations. Nobody will put him up, and then all of a sudden you end up with a big steal on that player if nobody has money left. So that's another thing that happens, and so that's why it's hard to give specific advice about salary cap / auction drafts.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Chris. I mean, I think people know that that's the last player in the tier, and maybe that's like they don't want to throw that player out because they know he's going to go for more money than everyone else from that tier. I think as a general rule, in a snake draft, I probably want to wait until the last player of a tier or second to last player and make sure I get that player. But in a salary cap draft, maybe I want to jump in the middle. Maybe not the first player, but second, third player in a tier before, that starts to dwindle down a little bit. Let's jump into first base overall. And we talked a little bit about the positions overall, but let's do a little word association. So, Chris, I'll start with you. When I say first base, what is the first word or thought that comes to your mind for that position?
Power. I mean, that's the big thing, and that's always been true of first base, but there are the elite players, your Freddie Freemans, your Vladimir Guerreros, maybe Matt Olson if he can sustain a lot of the gains that he made last season. But you'll never have trouble finding home runs and RBI specifically at first base, and then that's slightly less true of third base, but it's still pretty true. And so, you can either wait on first base and get one of the cheaper power and RBI guys, or you can reach up for the true 4 category guys. There are really only 4 category studs in at first base. And so that was one word.
Scott, first base, word association. Go.
Yeah, I was going to say mashers. So basically the same thing as Chris. You get a lot of high OBP guys at first base too, in formats where that matters, which, kind of matters in every format where runs are scored, right? So it's, slow-footed, powerful, sometimes patient guys, and not a lot of diversity within the position. You might find some guys who lean more toward batting average than home runs, but not that many.
All right, so let's start with the elite tier at first base, and that includes 2 players. Vladimir Guerrero, who has an ADP of 4.7. By the way, this ADP comes via Fantasy Pros. Their ADP for 2022 is up and running. So if you want to follow along, that would be fantasypros.com/MLB/ADP. And that includes right now RT Sports, the NFBC, and Fantrax. So an average of those 3 websites all combined right now. Vladimir Guerrero, an ADP of 4.7. Freddie Freeman, an ADP of 17.7. So typically Vlad is top half of the first round, and Freddie Freeman maybe sneaks in late first, but probably more so an early second round pick than anything else. And I don't want to focus too much on breaking down the players per se, because we'll have our position previews where we'll focus more on that. Probably more so of a strategy discussion here. But Scott, you make these tiers. What do you think about this first tier here, Vladimir Guerrero, and then your boy Freddie Freeman, who we still don't know where he's going to play going in the early second round?
Yeah, we still don't know where he's going to play. I don't think it makes that big of a difference with him. But
I mean,
Yankee Stadium.
If he signed with the Yankees, that would be pretty dope.
It'd be great. He hits a lot of balls to the opposite field, a lot of home runs to the opposite field, but he's gonna put up huge numbers no matter where he lands. He's not gonna go anywhere that moves him ahead of Vladimir Guerrero, and I don't think he's gonna go anywhere that drops him a tier behind Vladimir Guerrero either. So yeah, this was one of the easiest tiers really to put together because Vladimir Guerrero is, if you're not factoring in speed, he's arguably the best hitter in fantasy now. And then Freddie Freeman, of course, has been who he's been for close to a decade, probably, right? And very little slippage during that time.
Vladimir Guerrero hit 311, 48 homers, 111 RBI, 123 runs scored. He was the #1 overall player in Roto last season. He averaged 4 fantasy points per game, which was by far the most at the first base position. And finishing as the #1 overall player in Roto with just 4 steals. I thought that was pretty interesting for Vlad.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Because provided so many counting stats. That's what it comes down to. I mean, over 230 runs plus RBI. That is outstanding.
Yeah, that offense just created so much volume, and he missed just 1 game. And that's huge. He was more mortal in the second half, 905 OPS, but you're splitting hairs there. He's awesome.
Yeah. Chris, would you rather use a top half of the first round pick on Vlad, or would you rather have a back half pick and then take Freddie Freeman in the second round?
Yeah, I think if you could end up with Trey Turner and Freddie Freeman, that would be better than Vladimir Guerrero and whoever else you might get in the second half of the first round. But that's because I think Freddie Freeman is just, kind of an awesome value in the second, really around the midway point of the second round in the 12-team league. That just seems like a really, really advantageous price. And I think it's partially because, he only hit 31 home runs last season. He only drove in 83 runs. I don't think that's going to be an issue. He is basically a perfect hitter. He does everything incredibly well. There's really not anything he does as a hitter. And he'll occasionally steal bases. He's got 8 to 10 stolen base upside. He's done it 2 of the last 4 years, and obviously one of those years was a partial season. So,
by the way, 83 RBI. You mentioned he also scored 120 runs.
Yeah.
He led the NL in runs. So
and that's second year in a row that he's led the NL in runs scored.
Oh yeah, that's true, isn't it? Yeah.
He led the majors in runs scored last year in 2020.
Pretty interesting stat line there for Freddie Freeman with that RBI total overall. Got off to a slow start his first 2 months, 235 batting average, 828 OPS. I remember telling everyone last year the underlying numbers still looked really good. You should have been buying low on Freddie Freeman because the final 4 months, he was Freddie Freeman. 329 batting average, 927 OPS. The only thing that stood out to me, Scott, is obviously he's getting a little bit older. I think he's 32, 33 years old and has struggled against lefties 3 years in a row. And the launch angle was on the decline last year, career high 43% ground ball rate. Any concern at all when it comes to Freeman?
Nah. No. No concerns whatsoever. The Braves better bring him back, okay? None of this Yankees talk. Not on my podcast.
Come on, Scott. Come on.
They've been saving all that money. I mean, really, if they don't re-sign Freddie Freeman after all the penny pinching they did before the team came together, and the Ronald Acuna and Ozzie Albies contracts.
And they just won the World Series. And
if you don't re-sign Freddie Freeman, that is just look, if he wants to go to the Yankees or some other team and you offer him the most money, he doesn't want it, that's fine. But there is no world in which the Braves should not be the best offer. It would be criminal.
He has been as consistent as I've ever heard a player about saying, I don't want to go anywhere else. I just want to be here. So it would be incredibly stupid, but they've got to make sure that their real estate holdings are profitable. So priorities.
Jeez, man. Yeah, it's still a little odd that they didn't get something done, but we'll see what happens here once the lockout ends. Yes, everybody, it will end eventually. Regardless of what you think. The near elite tier. Let's move on to this next one. Matt Olson with an ADP of 33.7. Paul Goldschmidt, ADP 48.7. Pete Alonso at 56.3. And then Jose Abreu at 68.7. And Scott, you point out in your article that Jose Abreu is 1 tier lower in a points league. Something we've been saying since the season ended, Scott, was Matt Olson and Pete Alonso have done the old switcheroo. So last year, I didn't want Pete Alonso where he was going because I don't really like paying for home runs and RBI in a roto league. If I'm using an earlier pick on a hitter, I want batting average or steals involved somehow. And I think that's kind of the case now for Matt Olson. And you're getting Pete Alonso, who's a very similar player, 2 rounds later. And that's the same thing we were saying last year where Alonso was going earlier and Matt Olson was going later. So now that more ADP is starting to come together, it's very clear to me that Pete Alonso is just a much better value.
Well, yeah, and I mean that's what the tiers are. That's partly what they demonstrate, right? Is you're going to get basically the same outcome from all 4 of these players, Alonso and Olson maybe being the most the two that are the closest to mirror images of each other. It's understandable why people, myself included, would have a small preference for Olson. I mean, he cut his strikeout rate down to 16.8%, which is, he went from being a strikeout prone player to basically a contact guy who hits home runs with that kind of strikeout rate. But also Alonso, to a lesser degree, kind of moved in that direction more himself. 19.9% strikeout rate for him. It didn't seem to improve his stat line to the same extent it did Olson's, but yeah, I don't think you can predict things that finely to say that, okay, Olson is just a better player now and I expect better numbers from him,
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like Alonso had to sacrifice power for those contact improvements.
No.
It's not like he had a higher barrel rate in 2021 than he did in 2019. His average exit velocity was higher. His max exit velo has been right at 118.3 3 straight seasons. So I think we could see a delayed breakout from Alonso. And his expected WOBA was 376. It was 373 in his rookie season. And that was in a league where the average WOBA was 320 compared to 314 last season. So, in that context, he was arguably better than his really, really good rookie season.
And don't get me wrong, I still like Matt Olson. And in a vacuum, I'd rather have Matt Olson over Pete Alonso if they were going at the same ADP. That's just not the case this year. As great as Matt Olson was in 2021, he did slow down a little bit in the second half. Seems like maybe due to some bad BABIP luck, the strikeout rate was still really strong in that second half for Matt Olson. But he hit 257 with an 878 OPS over the final 3 months. Pete Alonso went on the IL in the middle of May with a sprained right hand. He returned on May 31st. From that point on, he hit 270, 31 homers, and 893 OPS over 115 games. That is a 40 homer pace over the course of 150 games. So nearly a full season. I usually don't project 162 games because it's not realistic. A lot of players don't do that at this point. But Pete Alonso was actually better over the final 3 or 4 months than Matt Olson was. So
yeah,
give me the discount there on.
Well,
can we throw Pete Alonso's 2021 season in everyone's faces when they mentioned the home run derby curse? Because he got a lot better after the home run derby.
But Chris,
I don't.
Ohtani.
I think people need to believe in. Certain people need to believe in curses like that. So I don't. No matter how much evidence you offer to counter it, I just don't think it matters to them. I didn't want to say for Matt Olson though. Like, what if he goes to the Yankees?
Oh, geez.
Right.
Oh, what if he gets? No, actually, weren't they talking? No, they were talking about playing him at a different position, right? Wasn't that one of the rumors?
No,
that was Matt Chapman.
Oh, Matt Chapman. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. It's a good point that you bring up, Scott, because it seems almost certain that Matt Olson is going to wind up somewhere else because there's all this talk about how the Oakland A's are going to go into a full rebuild and they want to get as much value out of their, viable MLB players as they possibly can. So whether he winds up with the Yankees, which seems like a real possibility, if Freddie Freeman signs somewhere else, there was talk that the Braves could trade for Matt Olson. I wouldn't rule out the Los Angeles Dodgers because they've been linked to Freddie Freeman as well. So yeah, all 3 of those teams I think would be pretty damn good for Matt Olson regardless. They're by far better ballparks than where he
they would all be improvements. And I think that's one of the things with Matt Olson is if he stays in Oakland, I don't think you can just expect a higher batting average than, even the 271, like that might be close to what the highest you could expect from him just because of the park he hits, the home run, the fly ball tendencies, all of that stuff, I think it's going to make him a low BABIP player. He has a 275 BABIP for his career.
Scott, quick thoughts on Paul Goldschmidt and Jose Abreu. Abreu is going 20 picks later at pick 68.7 in ADP right now. They're both a little bit older. A resurgent season for Paul Goldschmidt last year.
Yeah, and I don't know to what degree we buy it. I have quite a bit of skepticism myself, but Paul Goldschmidt could be one of the few first basemen who does make a reasonable contribution in the stolen base category. He was 12 for 12 last year. And of course, back in his prime, he had a 3-year stretch with the Diamondbacks where he averaged more than 20 steals a season. So it didn't come out of nowhere for him. He's not especially fast, but 12 for 12. I mean, why do you stop a guy from running when he has that kind of success rate, right? So, mostly I'm buying him for his bat, and he showed signs of decline prior to last year, the 2 years prior to that. But I mean, you see what the numbers where they are. It looked like prime Goldschmidt again. So I don't know. I think he belongs in this tier. He's not one I'm going to be especially enthusiastic about drafting, but if he ends up being the last guy left, then that's what the tiers are there to. Sometimes the tiers make the decision for you.
And if you want to read more about Jose Abreu, you can head on over to cbssports.com/fantasy/baseball. And he is part of Chris's Busts 1.0, which I read the other day. And I feel like he's been on that list for, I don't know, 3 or 4 straight.
Two straight years, I would say.
But yes, if you want to read more about Jose Abreu, then you can find out there. If not, then wait till our first base preview where we will break down all of these players more in depth on that podcast. The next best things tier, and this is where we see a big drop in price. And this is what tiering the players together is all about. So I mentioned Jose Abreu's ADP in that last group, 68.7. This next group includes Joey Votto, CJ Cron, and Rhys Hoskins. They're all going outside the top 135 picks. So think about that. It's like a 70-75 pick difference here, where Votto's ADP is 154, Cron 137.3, and Rhys Hoskins down at 149. And Chris, I think if you wait at first base, these guys I don't think that they're going to be difference makers. I guess Joey Votto still can because he showed it last year. It's obviously he's getting up there in age, but I would feel okay. That's the way I would put it. Okay, if I wound up with one of these guys as my starting first baseman.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you start to see the all or nothing kind of power guys. So it really, there's not that many guys who provide 4 category potential. Even Jose Abreu, he's really only like a plus in 2 categories at this point in his career, probably, unless he, has another 2020 season. But Votto is the one in this group that I think could be potentially a 4 category contributor. I know his average wasn't great last season, but the way he bounced back as a power hitter does make me think that there's still, the potential for actually not that much different from what Paul Goldschmidt did last season. I could see him hitting 290 with 35 plus homers.
Yeah, and you mentioned bounce back in the power department. Chris, he actually did something he never did before. 297 isolated power was a career high in his age 37 season. We're talking about Joey Votto, who is likely, in my opinion, going to be a future Hall of Famer, and he just did that again at age 37. So 51st overall player in Roto, 3.4 fantasy points per game. That was tied for 4th at the position with Paul Goldschmidt. He hit 36 homers. 19 players hit 35 or more. He did it in the fewest amount of games, 129. So he sold out for power, but he's kind of just like one of those advanced hitters where he found a way to make it work, and I'm not really going to doubt it as long as he could stay healthy.
And he called it. I mean, that's what I think helps me to buy it more is he deliberately changed his approach to get more power, and he predicted what the results would be, and that's what they were. And actually, it started late in 2020, and I know kind of the whole season was late, but he was batting 204 with 3 home runs. What was that? 32 games into it, and then his final 28 games, he hit 8 home runs. So, that's when he first changed up the approach, and that's when we first saw this new power emerge. And we were all kind of high on him last. I know Chris and I were anyway. Were you on board with him too, Frank? As maybe
I don't remember being higher on him than the consensus. So I'm just gonna rule myself out of being
that's fine.
there.
That's fine. Even when he got off to a slow start, we liked a lot of the underlying changes he made. So what the underlying numbers showed. So yeah, it's kind of surprising that he's still going as late as he is.
Yeah.
I was kind of tempted to tier him with that higher group with the Olsons and Alonsos and Goldschmidts. And, part of the reason I have to split the baby with Jose Abreu and put him a tier lower in points leagues is because I genuinely prefer Votto in points leagues to Abreu. So I can't tier a player higher that I don't prefer in that format,
Yeah, no, I get it. I think you just kind of have to bake in some risk just because of the age and the fact that, he's missed time. He was on the IL last year, and it seems like he's usually good for at least one IL stint per season, but it's still a really good ballpark to hit in. We'll see what happens with the lineup. I think, Nick Castellanos more than likely is going to be off that team, which, will overall affect his RBI and run outputs in 2022. CJ Cron and Rhys Hoskins are the other names in this tier, but I want to move on to the next one, the fallback options, which includes Max Muncy, Jake Cronenworth, Ryan Mountcastle, Ty France, Josh Bell, and Jared Walsh. Scotty, I got a bone to pick with you, and I wanted to ask, why couldn't Josh Bell be part of the previous tier? Because I feel like he's a very similar player to someone like CJ Cron, a 270 plus hitter, 26 to 30 home runs, something like that. I feel like those are all kind of similar players. So why not Josh Bell in the previous year?
Yeah, I think you could make that case. I think CJ Cron has the potential for an even better stat line in Colorado than the one he had last year. So that's part of it. Part of it is Josh Bell. He's played enough games with my heart that I don't entrust him entirely. I don't trust the Nationals to use him right entirely. But yeah, I think if you're an optimist, you can put Josh Bell in that higher tier. I'd rather treat him as more like a sleeper, I guess. Where's his ADP relative to these other guys? Is it in the same range as like Cron and Hoskins?
He's above. He's higher than Joey Votto, isn't he?
Yes. So Josh Bell's going at 144, just behind CJ Cron, just ahead of Rhys Hoskins, 10 spots ahead of Joey Votto. So really in that same exact price range.
Okay. I may need to look at that. I may need to think about that some more. I mean, I'm kind of giving my defense for why I have him ranked where I rank him because, I put together my rankings before there was any ADP, and then I have to design the tiers around my rankings, obviously. And maybe just my initial ranking was too low. It feels like a college football kind of thing, right?
One thing that you can say in Josh Bell's credit is he is the only first baseman in either of the first, well, I guess you don't get a first baseman who's multi-eligible until the fourth tier, and then it's him, Muncy, all these guys really, except for Walsh, right?
Well, he's not multi-eligible on CBS.
Oh, he played 10 games in the outfield last year, right?
Yeah, we need 20 over on CBS.
Yep.
So
yeah,
but he could get there.
Yeah, I think he was just hitting so well towards the second half of the season that they were trying to find a way to get his bat in the lineup any way they could. And with the universal DH coming, I think, if they're going to do that, they're probably just going to play him at DH or first base. So I would put some doubt on the outfield, but I think if you play in Yahoo, he will have that eligibility. So I guess keep that in mind. It was a really slow start for Josh Bell last year. From May 1st on, however, 279 batting average, 25 homers, and 865 OPS over the final 129 games. Max Muncy, we spoke about recently. He is in this tier, obviously dealing with that UCL injury. We still kind of need to wait to get more information there. Jake Cronenworth will have first, second, and shortstop eligibility on CBS. I think more likely is you'll use him as a middle infielder. That's just kind of my early takeaway. We talked a lot about Baltimore recently moving the left field wall back, and it was a big topic of conversation on Twitter this weekend. And Ryan Mountcastle looks like we probably should decrease him in value because of that. The one name we haven't really talked about here, Chris, is Jared Walsh, who I think the Jared Walsh optimist will also argue that he might need to be in that previous tier based on what he just did last year. 277, 29 homers, 98 RBI. He was really good, and that was without Mike Trout and Anthony Rendon in the lineup for a lot of the season.
Nah, I don't think he needs to be in a tier above. I think if anything, he's probably one of the easier fades in this range just because he was great last season, but he really overperformed his expected stats. And, that's not gospel. That doesn't necessarily mean he will continue to overperform. It doesn't mean that he's going to drop. But, 357 WOBA versus a 325 xWOBA, that's a pretty significant difference. That's going to be one of the bigger ones among everyday players. And so I think we probably got a, really, really good case scenario, maybe not the best case scenario for Jared Walsh last season, and I think regression is almost certain with him.
All right. Yeah, he does hit a lot of ground balls, and he struggles mightily against lefties as well. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I wanted to mention I actually have Walsh a tier lower in points leagues, and Ryan Mountcastle too. Those are the two from this tier who would tier lower in a points league. So yeah, they might be the two I want least from this tier, and I'm happy to be apart from the consensus on that.
All right, the next one we have here is the last resorts. I think at this point we're talking more about corner infielders and maybe utility bats in a points league or something at this point, but that includes Brandon Belt, Luke Voigt, Frankie Two Hits, Frank Schwindel, Yuli Gurriel, Alex Kirilloff, Tyler Stevenson, who I think obviously many people will use him as a catcher, Anthony Rizzo, DJ LeMahieu, who can be used at second base, and then Trey Mancini. Scott, who has the highest upside of this group, the last resorts tier?
I mean, it's got to be Voigt. He led the majors in home runs in 2020, and has since joining the Yankees, I believe I actually calculated this for my Sleepers 1.0 article that came out late last week. I believe his OPS since joining the Yankees is over 900, and there are a couple years, last year included, where injuries kind of derailed him, but when he hasn't been dealing with injuries, he's been money. And if the Yankees are willing to back him completely, he could move up 2 tiers here. I don't see why I wouldn't tier him with the CJ Crones and Rhys Hoskins of the world. It's the reason he's this low is because they haven't done that, and a lot of people assume they're going to go out and get a Matt Olson or Freddie Freeman or whoever else to upgrade first base.
He was one of the easiest buys for me in 2020 because it was so obvious that the hernia injury that he had in 2019, like that was when he stopped hitting. He had like a 900 OPS until that point and was on pace for over 100 RBI. And then he was an easy fade last season because he was probably not going to hit the 52 or 55 homers that he was on pace for. And now he's a pretty obvious buy as long as it looks like he's going to play every day. If they do sign someone, hopefully he gets traded because he's someone I'm going to have a lot of in the later rounds.
Yeah, I would say it's over a 50% chance that the Yankees bring a first baseman in. So I don't know if that means that he's leaving in that trade or if they're trading Luke Voigt away for something else, but I think the writing's kind of on the wall because they traded for Rizzo last year, and they were okay really down the stretch just benching Luke Voigt. He really didn't get a lot of playing time in that latter part of the season. The deep leaguers here, we have Jonathan Scope, Miguel Sano, Jesus Aguilar, Bobby Dahlbeck, and Nate Lowe. It's a pretty underwhelming group here. Nate Lowe, I still have some hope for here, Chris, because the Texas Rangers lineup got a lot better. Obviously, they bring in Semien. They bring Corey Seager. I think he was solid last year. He obviously was not spectacular. If he can lower that ground ball rate just a little bit, I think we can get mid-20s home runs with some pretty good counting stats. So anyone catch your eye here, the deep leaguers tier?
I mean, I think all of these guys, like maybe Miguel Sano has one of those seasons where he puts up a 360 BABIP and can be useful, but For the most part, no. I think this, like, Nate Lowe is probably the most interesting one. Jesus Aguilar, I think, is I don't think you need to say fade because nobody's really on him, but his RBI numbers last season seem really, really unlikely to repeat. So
I do feel like all these players are usable, though, right? I mean, Jonathan Scope, who's also eligible at second baseman, he was my second baseman for the majority of the year in the podcast league last year, the 12-team points league, where I had the highest scoring team, even though I didn't make the playoffs. But I had Scope as my starting second baseman for most of the year, and he's usually good for 20+ homers. Bobby Dahlbeck, I believe he hit 25 home runs last year. So this is between this tier and the previous two. That last tier you mentioned was very long with Yuli Gurriel and Trey Mancini, Frank Schwindel. This is really where you see the depth at first base stand out, because you could make do with these guys as your first baseman, if they're healthy and playing regularly. And there's a lot to choose from.
Nate Lowe, also known as Nathaniel Lowe. I actually think that's what he goes by now. He had 8 steals last year, too. He was 8 for 8, did not have a single caught stealing. So I wouldn't expect that type of efficiency again, but Texas does like to run, so you might get some oddball, out-of-position steals here from Nate Lowe. Maybe it's 5 to 7, something like that, by the time the season is over. The leftovers, there's lots of names here. That includes Seth Beer, Keston Hiura, Carlos Santana, Eric Hosmer, Spencer Torkelson, Tristan Casas, Lamont Wade, Rowdy Tellez, Lewin Diaz, Bobby Bradley, Nick Prado, Christian Walker, and Vinny Pasquantino. There are, again, a lot of names in that tier, so don't worry if you missed out.
That's a long tier at every position. I just throw in a bunch of names that people might care about at the end there. Yeah.
Scott, just say a name. Who is the one that you are most intrigued by in this tier? Just give me a name.
I mean, there's an obvious one, right?
Is there?
I was gonna say Seth Beer.
I was gonna say Seth Beer as well, but I'm gonna predict that the one you are talking about is Eric Hosmer, Chris.
Nope. No.
Who is it?
Keston Hiura.
No.
All right, so I guess it's not obvious at all. Who is it, Chris?
Spencer Torkelson.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I guess it just comes
one of the
down
top
to-
prospects in baseball. Just put up a 935 OPS in the minors as a 21-year-old. Got up to AAA, and produced at every level. Yeah, I think it's just a question of when he gets called up, right?
Yeah, that's the same thing that could be said for, I mean, there's a few prospects in this tier. Tristan Casas with the Boston Red Sox, a lot of people excited about him. Nick Prado, same thing with the Royals. He made it to AAA last year, so could see him up early in the season, and I think that would probably just completely sink Carlos Santana's value at that point. And Vinny Pasquantino, he's another prospect in the Royals system, but he hasn't played at AAA yet, so I think that's maybe a little bit further down the road into the season. But yeah, I think all names that you need to just remember, put them on your scout team, see what happens. The steamer projections for Spencer Torkelson, by the way, 130 games projected, 259 batting average, 29 home runs, 77 RBI. It seems very optimistic, but if we get that many games, that's within the range of outcomes for Torkelson. Yes, he is that good of a player. Before we hit the break, I want to promote a few things. Our friends over at Fantasy Football Today, that includes Chris, by the way, are up for the Best Social Media Award. It'll take you 10 seconds to vote for Fantasy Football Today. Just hit the link that is included in the podcast and YouTube description. If FFT wins the award, the Best Social Media Award, we'll give away some free Fantasy Baseball Today hoodies. So vote now and win an FBT hoodie. Again, the link is in the podcast and the YouTube description. Help out our friends, Chris, Adam, Jamie, Dave, and everyone else who contributes on that podcast so that they can take home the Best Social Media Award. The podcast scheduled for this week, by the way, I should have mentioned this earlier, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. We've been juggling things around. We are off on Monday, so we're not going to podcast Monday night. So we will be back Tuesday night. So Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday are the mornings that you will have a podcast in your feed. And last but not least, the Fantasy Baseball Today, the CBS Fantasy Baseball product launch is tomorrow, January 17th. Rankings, salary cap values, sleepers 1.0 from Scott. That's actually out already. Breakouts 1.0 from me, bust 1.0 from Chris, all going to be live on the site. So you're getting ready, you're diving in, you want to see the rankings, go check that out. On
Tiers 1.0. That's live too.
all the tiers are live, and that's why this will accompany those articles, so you can follow along, and obviously with everything that we are talking about here regarding those tiers. Let's take a quick break, and when we return, we'll hit the third base position. It's fun, kind of, not really. We'll talk about it here on Fantasy Baseball today. All right, so let's jump into third base tiers, and just like we did for first base, let's start with a little word association. I threw it Chris's way first last time, so Scott, that means I'm coming to you. What do you think? Third base, go.
Blurg.
That is definitely a fair response, and you will find out why once we break down these tiers. Chris, you're up. Third base.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
All right.
Scott eloquently summed it up.
We're going with Blurg for the third base position this upcoming season. Let's start with the elite. Jose Ramirez has an ADP of 4.7, actually identical to Vladimir Guerrero, who we spoke about earlier. And Jose Ramirez he did what he does every year. 266 batting average, 36 homers, 111 runs scored, 103 RBI, 27 steals. He's incredibly consistent, has finished top 12 overall in Roto in 4 of the past 5 seasons. He's also great in points leagues. He averaged 3.9 fantasy points per game, by far the most at the position last year. Scott, it's very obvious here. We have no issues spending a top 5 pick on Jose Ramirez. Who would you rather have, him or Vladimir Guerrero, when you factor in position scarcity?
I believe I rank Vladimir Guerrero ahead in both formats, but part of that is at this point, I'm expecting Jose Ramirez to have just an ordinary batting average, even though he doesn't strike out much. Mm-hmm. The approach that allows him to hit so many home runs relegates him to like a 260 batting average, and Vladimir Guerrero could hit 320 or whatever, So that helps make up for the steals difference. You expect even more home run output from Guerrero than you do from Ramirez. But yeah, the thing that brings it close is that position scarcity, because there may not be a clearer number one at any position, especially when you're factoring in Fernando Tatis's health concerns. I don't think there's a clearer number one at any position than there is at third base, where Jose Ramirez just, if you forget that weird stretch between 2019 and 2018 where he disappeared, and you just look at the final numbers those 2 years. I mean, every year is so bankable for stud production.
All right, Chris, same question to you. Let's say the top 3 picks were Tatis, Trey Turner, Juan Soto. Would you go with Jose Ramirez or Vladimir Guerrero? It's really batting average versus steals, I think. So what is it for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the power production's probably going to be pretty similar. I think you would project Vlad for more, but it'll be close. It'll be probably within 5, I think is the most likely outcome. But yeah, I would take Vlad first. I think you probably give him an edge in 4 out of the 5 categories, even if it's a relatively small one in a couple of those. And, Jose Ramirez could steal 27 bases again. It wouldn't surprise me if he stole 21 this season. So, he's an incredible player. Vladimir Guerrero probably has just a tiny bit more upside.
Yeah, especially when you factor in age, too. It's not like Jose Ramirez is old. I think he's
29.
29. Is he turning 30 this year? Is that
he turns 30 in September, midway through September? But yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I mean it's his age 29 season, so he's not old, but obviously Vlad is much younger, and because of that, I think maybe you give him a slight edge in terms of upside still at this point. The near elite tier includes Rafael Devers, who has an ADP of 18.3, Manny Machado at 26.3, Austin Riley at pick 47. Nolan Arenado at pick 64, and then Alex Bregman, who is going off the board at pick 75.7, and he is 1 tier lower in categories leagues, so roto or head-to-head categories. Scott, I feel like when the season ended, we talked about the possibility of having Manny Machado ranked over Rafael Devers, and where do you kind of fall on that debate now?
No, I do give the edge to Devers, but I'm probably going to draft more Machado. Machado could give you steals. He hasn't been a consistent source of them, but he could give you some. Devers probably won't give you that many. But Devers seems like a better Machado could just have better numbers across the board. I mean, we've seen that from him before, but Devers seems like a safer bet in the pure hitting categories than Machado does. So I do rank him slightly ahead, but it might be like 2 spots different in my rankings. Yeah, tiers wise, I mean, obviously they belong in the same tier. The interesting ones in this tier, I think, are Arenado and Bregman. Bregman, as you mentioned, only in this tier in points leagues because his plate discipline is incredible. So I think it's fair to elevate him in that format. Arenado, though, is going quite a bit later than these other 3, Devers, Machado, and Riley. I've tended in the few drafts I've done so far to kind of round 3-4 turn take Riley, just take him so that I don't have to worry about how awful this position gets. And by the way, I think the tiers even kind of undersell how bad it is because there's so many risks within each tier. But yeah, I've tended to take Riley at the 3-4 turn now. I still think that's fine, but seeing how late Arenado consistently goes, round 6, sometimes around 7, I think he's probably the third baseman I'm going to end up with the most. And given that I'm tiering him with those other 3, it makes sense.
Yeah, we talked about Austin Riley a lot recently. We did a podcast, Can the 2021 Breakouts Do It Again in 2022? And we talked a lot about the possibility of batting average regression for Austin Riley because he hit 303 with a 279 expected batting average. And while he hits a lot of line drives, his BABIP was 368. It was 3rd highest in baseball. So I think we just expect natural regression. Maybe Austin Riley hits 275 to 280, which is still really good. And I think it will be better than Nolan Arenado. But Chris, what do you think about that conversation of Austin Riley, Scott talking about taking him at the 3-4 turn, where you might be able to wait until, if you have a late first round pick, you might be able to wait till the 5-6 turn to get someone like Nolan Arenado. Would you rather do that?
Yeah, it's pretty unlikely that I'm going to draft Austin Riley. I think I would rather have Arenado and Bregman at their cheaper prices. I think Riley, it's one of those things where it just depends on if he can sustain the progression that he made last season. And he's young. He's a top prospect. He's a talented player. So all of those things are working in his favor. But it's also worth remembering that progress is not always linear. Rafael Devers is a good example of that. We've seen some ups and downs with him. I think he's a much more talented hitter than Austin Riley. So I just could see like long stretches from Austin Riley where the plate discipline just sort of swamps everything else and he can't really do much. So I am worried about him for sure.
I think the most worrisome aspect of Riley's profile, same thing for Manny Machado, is batting average. And yeah, Arenado, as a Cardinal, he's probably going to hit 260. He doesn't get that BABIP boost, puts a lot of balls in the air. Doesn't get that BABIP boost he used to get at Coors, puts a lot of balls in the air. So Arenado's probably not going to help you in batting average. But if you're penciling him in for 260, I mean, I don't think Riley or Machado is a sure thing to hit over 260 either. Yeah. And they're probably all hitting between 30 and 35 home runs. So, and those are the kinds of things you think about when you're putting together tiers, is what is the most likely scenario for this player? What is the upside, the downside, etc. And I think it's very plausible that Arenado ends up with numbers that look about like Machado's and Austin Riley's.
And I'll say in Arenado's defense, it was his first time playing outside of Coors Field, seeing players change parks, especially a park that has that dramatic of an effect. It could have just been, he needed a year to adjust. I wouldn't write off the possibility that he could, probably not hit 300 again, but I don't think it's like a dramatically worse chance that he hits 280 than either Machado or Riley. I think they probably have a better chance, but it's not, 80% versus 20%. It's probably 30% versus 35% or something.
I don't know if I ever told the story. I probably have, but Rafael Devers' rookie season, I went to a Yankee Red Sox game, and I saw him hit an opposite field home run off of Aroldis Chapman, like 102 mile per hour, like chest high fastball that he goes opposite field with and hits a home run his rookie season. And ever since then, I was like, this guy is going to be a star. Like his bat speed is just absolutely ridiculous. So Rafael Devers, that's my Devers story. I fell in love with him ever since then. He is
outstanding. He underperformed his expected stats quite a bit last season too. It's worth noting. I mean, he had a 291 XBA, 569 X slug. So there's clearly the potential for another leap from Rafael Devers.
Same thing for Machado too, actually. 278 batting average, 290 XBA, 489 slug, 517 expected slug for Manny Machado. Bregman in this tier, worth noting, he underwent wrist surgery in November, and he was actually just cleared to resume hitting last Friday, January 14th. So that's a good sign there for Alex Bregman. He turns 28 years old on March 30th, so he's still in his prime. So I would expect, you don't love wrist surgery, but I still feel okay. I feel okay about the possibility of him bouncing back in that great Astros lineup. The next best things tier, we have Adalberto Mondesi, ADP 69.7. He is undoubtedly a tier lower in points leagues. Chris Bryant with an ADP of 86. Anthony Rendon, ADP 111.7. And then Justin Turner at 152.3. And as you can see, this tier is all over the place. Yes, on CBS, Adalberto Mondesi will only have third base eligibility to start the season. We'll see if he plays shortstop, if Bobby Witt comes up, how they shuffle those two guys around. Lots of steals, can't stay healthy. He has not played more than 102 games at the MLB level yet. Again, that is
he's never played more than 127 games in a season ever. And that was going back to, I believe, 2013 when he was a 17-year-old prospect. So this is... I am the injury agnostic guy, but this is a guy who literally has never stayed healthy. That doesn't mean he can't do it this year, but I think he's undoubtedly the riskiest player in the draft pool. And I don't think anybody would really disagree with that. I think he's going to be one of the most controversial players again. And there is a 0% chance he finishes in the 70th overall range in Roto.
Yeah,
he's either going to stay, if he plays 125 games, he's probably going to be a top 25 hitter.
Yeah.
Or he's not going to play at all.
Yeah, you're right about that. I mean, the upside is just tantalizing. We saw it the year before where, it was a shortened season, but in August he hit 179, 0 homers, 7 steals. In September, he had 356, 6 homers, 16 steals in 24 games. I mean, if he could stay healthy, he's amazing. But
just put 2019 and 2020 together. He played 161 games, 91 runs, 15 homers, 84 RBI, 260 batting average, 67 stolen bases. I mean, he could steal more bases than a whole team this year.
Yes, I'm looking at you, Yankees. They don't have a lot of speedsters on the base pass there. Chris Bryant is fine. He's still a free agent. We'll see what he can do. Scott, I want to talk a little bit.
Sign with the Rockies.
Yeah, but that would move him up a tier for sure.
Anthony Rendon, Scott, and Justin Turner, very interesting. And I think at this point they probably provide similar things: higher batting average, modest power. Maybe mid-20s in terms of home runs is what you're expecting there. Rendon, I don't think he's done yet. I mean, he turns 32 years old in June. He's coming off hip surgery, but he has dealt with a good amount of injuries himself. So what do you think about Rendon versus Turner? They're going about 40 picks apart right now.
It's weird that I'm splitting up Bregman and Rendon because I feel like they've been such similar players throughout their careers. But I know Bregman had a lot of issues staying healthy last year, but I just feel like the risks, especially coming back from hip surgery for Rendon, are that much higher. He's, a few years older than Bregman, so that doesn't help either. If I miss out on that second tier, which I'm going to try not to, but if I miss out on Riley, if I miss out on Arenado, then Rendon is probably going to be my fallback option, my number one fallback option at third base, just in the hopes he stays healthy and recaptures that second round form that he's shown at times in the past. But I don't feel good about him doing that.
Yeah. And, injuries are a big concern for him because he's coming off the season that he had and the surgery that he had. But, from 2017 through 2020, he missed no more than 26 games in any season and played at least and missed fewer than 15, I believe, in 3 out of the 4. So it's not like this has been a long-standing issue for him. It's really he had one really bad year in terms of injuries and performance, and it's just a question of, is that the start of the end?
What was the hip surgery he had? Trying hip impingement. Okay.
Yeah. It was
if it was a labrum like Matt Chapman had, that would be even scarier. But hips are tough. Hips are tough. Part of the issue, and this goes for Bregman as well, is they're both the kinds of players who aren't going to fare as well with the deadened ball. And Rendon wasn't very good even when he was healthy last year, and I'm not sure how much that played into it.
The fallback options tier includes a few names that I think you're looking at for corner infield. We have Josh Donaldson, Matt Chapman, and Yoan Moncada. Chris, I want to try my best to just, like Scott said, at least get someone from the previous tier to be my starting third baseman, because if I've made it this far, then that means I did something very wrong.
Yeah, I don't hate the idea of having Matt Chapman as my starter, just because I do think there's a pretty good chance he bounces back. He's still, young enough that you wouldn't think it's just the end for him. One thing that I don't mind if you're the type of person who's really anal retentive about setting your lineups, especially in a daily league, is like if you could get Josh Donaldson and CJ Cron as your corner infielders, and just like anytime CJ Cron's not at Coors Field, start Josh Donaldson, that would probably be a very, very profitable companion. And Josh Donaldson, you're not going to get a full season from him at this point.
But he was still pretty productive when he did play last year.
The stat test numbers were outstanding for him.
Yeah, you never know when that's going to end. He's in his late 30s at this point. So definitely not somebody you want to rely on as your number one third baseman. That's why this tier's called the fallback options, right? I would say I would agree with Chris about Chapman. And in fact, I have Matt Chapman in my sleepers 1.0. That's my number 2 fallback op. That, if I don't get the Riley or an Arenado, going for Rendon. If that doesn't work out either, I'm going for Chapman, because he'll be another year removed from that torn labrum in his hip. And that Buster Posey, that was how he pulled that fake out where we thought he was done, is because he needed a few years to get back to full strength after that same surgery. And it happened last year, and he was great again. Chapman, you really saw it impacted in his exit velocity way, way down last year. If he gets that back up, I think he's back to being a 40 homer candidate, especially if he winds up with the Yankees, right? In Yankee Stadium.
Or anywhere else, really.
Yeah.
O.co or whatever we call it now is a pretty bad place for anyone to have to hit.
And it's worth mentioning Moncada, like the same thing could happen with him. We've seen Moncada be a high-end player in the past. He's still young enough that he could recapture it. It's not as clear-cut how he gets back there to me, but it's certainly possible.
I'll point out with Matt Chapman, there is a chance that they kind of trade everyone away and maybe keep him still as like the focal point of the rebuild. And if they do that, the counting stats are probably going to be really bad. So just keep that in mind. If they trade away Matt Olson and a few other pieces, maybe Chapman goes somewhere, and obviously that would help his stock. But if he remains in Oakland without a Matt Olson type, I think obviously that would put a damper on his outlook as well. The last resorts tier, just 2 names, Eduardo Escobar and DJ LeMahieu, who you are likely to use at second base. We know what we're getting from Escobar at this point, a middling batting average, 250 plus, 25 home runs. I think he'll likely play every day, or close to every day for the New York Mets. But I want to move on to
wait, just real quick. The last resorts has 2 players at third base, that is compared to 9 at first base.
Yeah, it's bad. There's just not a lot of, even when you're talking about at least at first base, like you said, Scott, there are names that are usable, someone that could provide something later on in your drafts there. And I think as we get into this next tier, the deep leaguers, there is some upside here. So I don't want to sell this tier short, but it includes Ryan McMahon, Eugenio Suarez, Luis Arias, Patrick Wisdom, Jamer Candelario, and a former love interest of one, Scott White, Ke'Bryan Hayes. Love no more, because I've seen some bashing going on Twitter regarding Ke'Bryan Hayes.
I can't believe what his ADP is. He's basically getting drafted the same as he was last year, around 150th.
I'll tell you exactly why, Scott. People are basically throwing out last year because of the wrist injury. They think it was solely because of that. And I guess there's a chance that still affects him this year. And a lot of the drafts that are happening now are high stakes leagues, NFBC, and you need speed. And he gives you out of position speed. He's projected for double digit steals at third base, which, you're not really going to get that from anyone else outside of Jose Ramirez. So those are the main, I guess, defending.
Yes, I got those defenses on Twitter. I would say that double digit steals potential, 15 steal potential, let's say, isn't worth the hit I think he's going to give you in the other categories. I don't know that 30 steal potential is, frankly, because I'm just not confident he's going to provide much of anything in the way of power anymore. They could be right that it was all the wrist injury. It was just a season that got derailed early by that injury. He was not healthy the rest of the way, and that's why his numbers were as bad as they were. But the minor league track record doesn't support that theory. It's really just that stretch of 18 games in 2020 that suggests he could be this great hitter. And if that's the most recent thing I've seen from you, you're an up and comer and you have some nice underlying contact skills and everything, okay, I'm willing to see the glass half full like I was last year. But when we have this much larger sample that suggests, like his minor league stats did, he's not much of a hitter, then I gotta play it more skeptically than it seems like the majority are. So that's why I have him tiered here with Jeimer Candelario and Patrick Wisdom, who, as you pointed out, Frank, I mean, Candelario was useful last year. Wisdom has 40 homer potential, probably. He might strike out too much to even keep his job. So there is upside here beyond just Hayes. But you can only expectation-wise, you can only expect so much from this group.
I will point out with Luis Arias, he was featured in my Breakouts 1.0, and he had a pretty, I'm not going to say big. It was a very good second half where he hit 266. He had an 850 OPS, and he just improved in all the ways that you want to see. He lowered his strikeout rate. He raised his walk rate. He hit more line drives. He made more hard contact. He's likely to play every day. And remember last year, they were kind of messing around where they weren't playing him every day. And once he started hitting, they got him in there. So projected to play every day, start at third base for the Milwaukee Brewers. It's a solid lineup. I think there's some upside there. And it's a really good ballpark to hit in as well. So for all those reasons, Chris, I know that someone you liked in the past, Luis Arias. I think if everything breaks right for him, we could see like a 270, 25 plus homer, maybe 6 to 8 steal kind of season, which I think would be a very, very good player at his cost right now.
I mean, from June 1st, his 146 game pace, he was on pace for 146 starts from June 1st on. He hit 261 with a 29 homer, 99 run, 83 RBI pace. I don't know how sustainable it is. Some of the underlying numbers don't quite back it up, but he's absolutely someone I would love to draft, and I'm struggling with Ryan McMahon. And we don't talk about defense much in fantasy sports, obviously, because it doesn't matter, except for, supporting pitchers. But he was worth 22 fielding runs last season, and that got him to a 4.0 wins above replacement, which is by far the highest of his career. Mm-hmm. If that falters, if he takes a step back defensively, if he regresses, I think he's at the point in his career where he's not guaranteed an everyday job.
He is because he's on the Rockies,
That's what
they just
maybe.
Even if they had a great prospect, I'm sure they would just keep running out Ryan McMahon and his.
But he's also the kind of guy that, if he happened to get traded, I don't think he would be fantasy relevant at all.
No, he wouldn't. You're absolutely right about that. I mean,
he has never had a league average OPS plus.
Yeah,
he has never. Yeah, he's a pretty bad hitter outside of the context of Coors Field.
He was a solid hitter last year. I'll give him credit. 254, 23 homers, 80 runs, 86 RBI, 6 steals. I mean, that's an okay player. I mean, that's a usable corner infielder. So I don't want to sell him short. He had a solid season and completely changed the launch angle and the batted ball data. So, if he continues to go down that path, then maybe we could see even more from Ryan McMahon. But I think it's a good point that you bring up.
The numbers were pretty ugly after April, though.
I know. He had a good first month or two, and then he basically fell off. The leftovers, we'll quickly wrap up here. Lots of names here. Alec Boehm, Josh Young, Jose Miranda, Kevin Biggio, Evan Longoria, Mike Moustakas, Jonathan Villar, Gio Urshela, J.D. Davis, Luis Ariz, Abraham Toro Hernandez, Brian Anderson, Carter Kieboom, Josh Harrison, John Birdie, and Jake Berger. It's got some prospects in this tier. Pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Josh Young, Jose Miranda. Just give me a name. Maybe your favorite sleeper of this group.
I'm going to say Josh Young. I think he could push for a job in spring training. I'd like his chances more if he was on a team with a chance to go somewhere. But, him and Jose Miranda both, if we hear a lot of buzz about them in spring training, they can move up quite a bit in my rankings.
I'm about to complete my third draft of the offseason, and I have Josh Young on one team. I have Jose Miranda on the other. So especially in like these deeper best ball or draft and holds, they are players at third base that I'm targeting later who I think do have some upside. Chris, just give me a name, a favorite sleeper here or someone that you're enticed by in this leftovers here.
Alec Boehm. I like the idea of taking him with a late round pick as a bounce back candidate. The underlying numbers aren't great overall, but there are enough enticing things there. I mean, the average exit velocity being 89th percentile is a big deal. So that if he puts things together, I think he could still be a starting caliber player. And also want to point out, it's spelled like the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung, not Young. Jung. If you haven't come across the name, he is a prospect. Some people may not know. They hear you say Young, they're going to be like, where's this Josh Young guy? Jung.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, probably something I should reveal to the people as the host of this podcast, but that's why you're here, Chris, to help me out. So Josh, Jung is the name there, third base prospect with the Texas Rangers. We're going to wrap there. For Chris and Scott, I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. We'll be back again on Wednesday with the middle infield tiers. We will see you then. Bye-bye.